Hi, this is John Walker from Perry Hall, Maryland. My wife and I, Mary Louise, are up here on our annual Libraries and Cemeteries tour, trying to fill in gaps in our respective family genealogies. This is an annual event, and we look forward to it. We always meet nice people, and occasionally we find those nuggets of information that do fill in blanks. Mary Lou is related to the Hendrickses from the Carrying Place. They settled there prior to 1800 and have had a permanent residence or presence there ever since, both above ground and below ground. My connection to the area is somewhat removed, up in the Wilton area of Lenox and Addington, and actually my great-great-grandfather, Hiram Walker, and his wife, Mercy Timmerman, settled on Concession 7, Lot 14 in Kingston Township. But the nearest place that had any other people in it was Wilton. But they were there on the Florida Road in Kingston Township, settling probably up in the mid-1840s. Hiram and Mercy had 12 children, and they all reached adulthood, which is something of, I guess, unique for that time and place. You know, childhood diseases usually got a couple of them, but their 12 carried right on through, including my great-grandfather, Stuart, who eventually moved to the States, which is where I came from. The contact my contact with the Quinte area really is below ground, and it's a burial story, and we'll get to that towards the end of whatever else I'm going to say. My genealogy work started with Hiram, and from Hiram to me, the line is clear. But there was virtually nothing about Hiram. It's that gray period from roughly, the initial settlers in the late 1700s through the initial Canadian census in 1851. And you're pretty well limited to church records or land records or miscellaneous things that pop up. It really is a gray period and difficult to plumb to find out what we're looking for. Who are my ancestors? So for some reason with Hiram, there's virtually nothing prior to his being established in, again, the Wilton area in the mid-1840s. As an adjunct to Mary Lou's research in her Hendricks family, I was in Marilyn Adams here and saying, well, let's look for Walker. And I came across a Cannon family history with a reference to Walkers. And that Walker was a Daniel Walker, and it listed Hiram and his siblings, and Hiram being born in 1806, which was consistent with what we did know about his predecessors. So we have a Daniel Walker. Well, if you do any research in this area, you'll find that there is a whole lot of Walkers who settled generally in the area as UEs. And every branch of that family has a Daniel. So we found that there were probably, let's say, a dozen Daniels. And of those dozen, there were probably half a dozen that fit either from time frame or geography with being possible candidates for Hiram's father. If you look at Reed's sons and daughters of UE, there are again a number of Daniels in there, and there is a Daniel that pops up as a UE and also as a son of a UE. And there's a whole separate story there, but the very short story is that this Daniel, during the American Revolution, was of an age, which was like 10 or 11 or 12, where he qualified as a UE. But his father was an active belligerent, if you will, in the Loyalist cause. And so Daniel became, if you will, a double dipper, as both in his own right and as a legitimate son of a UE. If you, from Reed, the Daniel there lists children who do not include Hiram. And so we say, well, that doesn't work too well, does it? But then if you dip into some other sources, and in particular Dr. Burley's marvelous fonts, back before the internet really became prevalent or accessible with lots of stuff, Dr. Burley was really the only place that you could dig out little nuggets that you could perhaps tie into today's world. And he did his work in the 10s, 20s, up until the 1950s. It's all available at Queen's University, and it's also available online. Literally thousands and thousands of pages. We digress a little bit there. Russ Waller, I think, had a couple of references to various Daniels in his work, the rabbits of Ernestown and such as that, which again were really good starting points for where you might find newly acquired information, if you will, particularly on the internet. Well, through some research on land records and a few other places, we're pretty sure that this Daniel married Elizabeth Lake. Elizabeth Lake was the daughter of Christopher Lake, a genuine UE. And they settled in Murray Township in, let's say, the greater Carrying Place area. From the Newcastle censuses of the early 1800s, there's definite evidence that they were there from at least 1818 up through at least 1827. And we wind up with a little bit more concrete information after that. And I guess we come to the real Walker connection. Elizabeth, the wife, died in May of 1836, and the burial certificate, the St. John's Church burial certificate, which was witnessed and the gravedigger was there, said she was the wife of Daniel. So that's a pretty good connection. Daniel himself died in August of 1836. It is pretty evident that they were buried in what is now called the Old Carrying Place Cemetery. Neither of them show up on any of the enumerations of that cemetery, and there are no grave markers. But I would, it's probably at the 95% level of confidence that they're in the ground there. So that's my direct Walker connection to Quinte and the area that your Marilyn Adams Center provides such a wealth of other information on. I got a cup of coffee when that's done. Okay? There's one other note of interest here. If you go back into the petitions for land, Elizabeth Lake Walker applied for land as the daughter of a UE in 1835, which is very late to do that. Well, and she says she is the widow of Daniel Walker. Now, this is a year before she died, and she died before he died. So was she a widow of convenience, or I don't know. I guess there's one other anomaly there. She had applied for a grant as a daughter of a UE in 1790-something, and she was actually awarded a grant. In 1835, when she certified that everything I've said here, my mark, is true, she wasn't a widow, and she'd already gotten a grant. So I guess, the kind of takeaway from that is don't believe everything you read in official records, even if they're sworn to and notarized and all that good stuff. So subsequent research did identify the Daniel who is, again, at, let's say, 90% confidence, the father of my Hiram Walker. There's a whole lot of digging around into the deep weeds to find this out. If you really care, if you really want to do that, and it may tie in with some stuff that is of more direct interest to you, Marilyn Adams has a copy of my 400 Years of Walkers, or All the Daniels. And so the research that ties in who Harlan's father really was, and something about the 4 wives and many children that he spread across this part of the country. Again, I appreciate the work that you folks do, and I would once again point out that you are a fantastic resource and really, really nice people to know, even if you don't find a particular nugget that you're looking for. So thank you very much. Continue doing what you're doing.